Are we ready? All set? Okay. So, sorry for the delay. As we saw yesterday, the reason that we have to go through this detour, or excursus, is the simple fact that economic schools are based on philosophical schools, right? Economics is based on epistemology. You say something has value, how do you know that? What is value? How can you perceive the effectiveness or less effectiveness of an economic system? So remember, the bad guys, Ricardo, Malthus, James Mill, John Stuart Mill, many others, these are not only employees of the British East India Company, but they're based on empiricism. In other words, they're based on John Locke. Now, appropriately, the withered mummy of British imperialism here comes forward. He was a political hack, and he worked for this character, Lord Ashley, Lord Shaftesbury later on, and the faction that he served is called the Cabal. And Cabal, there's a certain amount of debate whether the term Cabal came first or whether these guys launched it around 1670, but it's a group of British oligarchs, quite evil. And this is Clifford, Ashley, the one he worked for, Buckingham, Arlington, and Lauderdale. And look, these guys are still all over the map, aren't they, right? Across the river here in Arlington or down in Florida. So C-A-B-A-L spells cabal. It's oligarchy. So this is British oligarchical economics. But it's more. It flowers, of course, in the Stuart Restoration, which is when this is going on, right? After Cromwell, Cromwell has essentially destroyed the society. He's very evil. And then they bring back the Stuarts, right? Charles II and James II. However, this person is also an exemplar of what we know as the Venetian Party, the Venetians in England. This is the great secret. Why did the British Empire get this advantage compared to all other competing ones, right? The Dutch or the French or others, right? The Spanish, although in decline. It is because of the support of Venice. In other words, the Venetian networks all over Europe, the Middle East, the Mediterranean, were mobilized in support of the British, and in particular, the philosophical works that are associated with John Locke are actually an exercise in plagiarism. They're copied. They're copied with other filler added in to hide the fact that they're copied. And this is the prime example is Locke. His essay on human understanding is plagiarized from this character here that I study, right? I've written a dissertation, a book about other aspects of Paolo Sarpi. Paolo Sarpi of Venice, active 1600 to 1620, 1624, in there, one of the most formidable intelligence officers, game masters in the history of Europe. What I show in my dissertation book is that he is certainly a huge force in unleashing the 30 Years' War, 1618 to 1648, the 30 Years' War, which killed 1/3 to 1/2 of the population of Central Europe. It is by far the worst war in recent European history, right? World War I, World War II don't come close in proportional terms. So here's Sarpi, and I've hopefully added this book. The components of this book, Against Oligarchy, are online, and as soon as my Ford Foundation grant comes through, we're going to put them together and make that into a book. So if the Ford Foundation is listening, I hope they don't forget me this time around, right? I've been sitting by the phone all these years. So, John Locke. Now, what's the epistemology? I said it was sensationalism. Unfortunately, it's not very spicy or piquant in that sense. The idea is sense perception. The Latin motto for these guys is, there's nothing in the mind that was not previously in the senses. Nihil in intellectu quod non prius in sensu. There's nothing in your head that wasn't in your senses first. Taste, smell, whatever, light. And this is wrong. This is fundamentally wrong. This is crazy. This is nuts. The mind, the main function of the mind is to create concepts. Concepts, not sense impressions. Concepts that can subsume, that can include, that can summarize, right? That can synthesize facts, details, and sense impressions. Whenever anybody says to me, "Thank you for the wonderful information you have imparted," man, I shudder and I say, "Tarpley, you're a failure. You failed again." It's not about information. There's too much information. The internet is full of information. That's not the point. You got to push away information, right? You got to, otherwise you sit there and say, "Give me a book," and another. "Give me a website," and another, and another, and another. No, there's got to be a point where, obviously you want to do your homework, but you have to come to a concept. The German term Begriff, this is really important. The Begriff says you grab things. In other words, I have 1,000,000 facts, and I grab them. Otherwise, how can we live? There's an information explosion. Look at the internet. How many new sites every day? It's all information. Don't you feel crushed? If you're a Lockean, you say, "Man, there's so many facts. I can't even come close." And you're going to be crushed. I don't want you to be crushed. Don't be a Lockean. Get on top of it. In other words, realize that knowledge, human knowledge, is conceptual. Another way to say this is to synthesize a gestalt. You get the big picture. You can do that rather quickly. I'm going to show you how, right? And you've got to recognize this capacity in yourself. You're not dealing with facts. This is not about memorizing facts. This is about a method, as we said yesterday. We need to have a new method of thinking, which is not Locke and not these other characters. So the Lockean epistemology is the sense perceptions are a series of billiard balls. And they come in, right? Like counters, right? They come in, ka-ching, ka-ching, like coins, right? It's like slot in your head and the coins go in. The sense perceptions come in. And what can your mind do? Your mind is very weak, very weak. It can rearrange them, right? It can find patterns in them. It can discover that one comes first and the other comes second, or it can try to find new ways to put them together. But in this Lockean system, the mind creates really nothing new, nothing. Simply a receptacle for these functions, these billiard balls that come in. And any form of education that focuses on memorizing facts is detrimental, because it doesn't focus on the real essence of the human mind, which is this concept-forming ability. Auf den Begriff bringen, right? To reduce something to a concept, or to elevate, better yet, elevate it to a concept. So you push aside all the details. What is the pattern? What is the concept? What is the Begriff, right? The eidos for the Greeks, right? Since we're in the Greek mode. And from that point of view, the drill and grill of No Child Left Behind and the Common Core, right? These are the facts you should know. That's not the point. You should learn to form concepts. You should learn to harness and promote and push and direct this concept formation. If you are a Lockean, you are trapped in Plato's cave. Plato's cave is the world of people here, the prisoners, who are the slaves of their sense impressions. That's all they know. Remember, there's some sunlight that's coming from the entrance to the cave. It's diffused. There's also a fire that casts some light. And then people come along here with puppets, little models, that cast shadows on the wall. And these poor people think that the shadows cast on the wall are the essence of reality. And they're not. They are essentially sense impressions. This is the world of Locke. If you go with British empiricism, American pragmatism, Locke, from Locke to Hume to Dewey and William James, this is where you are, chained. And you'll remember, this is the book 7 of Plato's Republic that I think at least some were asked to read. Right? It's a good thing to look at for this presentation. Here we have these people. If you try to take them out into the sun, they don't like it. Right? You try to free somebody from the slavery of sense impression. Wow. The poltergeist of Locke. Anyway, you know that. Never fails. The ascent to the sunlight, they don't want to do it. As a matter of fact, they want to kill you. If you try to drag them out of the cave and into the sunlight, they want to kill you. And that's the human condition. As Plato says, if you're a philosopher in the midst of a democratic mob, you feel like you're locked into a cage with wild animals. It's unfortunate, but this is true, at least sometimes, right? The mob can be ugly, right? Look at the French Revolution. Okay, now let's go through some more of the bad guys, right? We've done Locke. How about this one? Bishop Berkeley. You gotta. If you want to be cool, you gotta call him Bishop Berkeley, not Berkeley. He's Bishop Berkeley. Bishop Berkeley. And this is an array of divines of the established Church of Britain who turn out to be quite monstrous, right? As Leibniz was writing about this time, natural religion is much decayed in England. In other words, there is a real problem in England. I think it has to do with going back and forth so many times. What I mean is Catholic until Henry VIII, then Protestant, then Catholic again under Bloody Mary with massacres, then Protestant after the successor, right? Various kings and queens, and then Cromwell, right? And then he's there to tell you got to be a Calvinist, right? So you go from Episcopalian to Calvinist to Episcopalian. So after all that, there's a certain cynicism among the British about religion itself. So anyway, his line is, he's the most extreme subjectivist of a series of subjectivists. And what he says is, there's nothing real here but me. You guys don't exist. You're part of a movie that God shows me to develop my moral sense. You guys are just images in a movie that God shows me so that I can be saved. How about that? Esse est percepi, right? To be is to be perceived. There's nothing more to being than to be perceived. And what is that? That's what they say on every talk show on cable television. In Washington, perception is reality. That's what he says. It's really the same thing. Perception is reality. That's all there is to it. And you will see that as the British Anglo-American method of thought has spread out over the world, it has promoted radical subjectivism, extreme subjectivism, the denial of outside reality, and the intense preoccupation with my feelings, whether I'm offended, my state of mind, what it means to me, and just an inability to grasp that there are huge processes out there which are for you objective. Public opinion, you could say public opinion is a sum total of subjectivities, right? It's what everybody thinks. But from the point of view of an individual, that's objective, right? For me, public opinion is an objective force. I have to reckon with it. Or the world economy, the world division of labor, right? The state of world markets, let's say, if there's a panic going on. The panic is subjective, but when it's widely shared, then that's going to be subjective. So one of the purposes of this course is to make you aware of the overwhelming subjectivity of modern sort of pro-imperialist thought from Oxford and Cambridge and the Ivy League and so forth. And to realize that this, it verges on solipsism. Solipsism is what he taught. Again, you don't exist. I'm real, you're not. You're part of this film. The only reality is me as an individual. It's the most extreme form of this. Is that clear? This is a really, and of course, he gets the great university named after him on that basis, right? You have to go to Berkeley to be a radical subjectivist.
If I could, I don't want to interrupt, but how cynical is this? In other words, these people are the puppet masters. They're creating an externalized reality to fool people. Does Berkeley believe it himself, or does Locke believe it himself?
Only his confessor knows for sure.
Okay, or is it a completely cynical calculation where they know that they're running a hoodwink as a means of control?
This is really hard to say. I know Sarpi. I forgot to mention. Actually, I forgot to mention. If you want to read the original from which Locke copied, it's translated to English by yours truly. This is called The Art of Thinking Well, Arte di Ben Pensare. It's about 20 pages. And we have a commentary later on from a Doge of Venice, Foscarini. Doge Foscarini of Venice, around 1770, 1780, says, Locke copied from Sarpi, but he added more examples and more material to make it into a book. But nevertheless, the guts of it are all in Sarpi. Then we have the other guy we have to mention. This teaches us a number of things. William Petty became the first Marquis of Lansdowne and then the second Earl of Shelburne. The reason that I have to get him up here is that this is the guy who told Adam Smith, write The Wealth of Nations. Let's have a book about free trade and free markets, because there's too much dirigism in the world. Now, this shows us a couple of interesting things. When you're dealing with the British oligarch in historical research, they're a moving target, because they have three names. They changed their name 3 times. And it's not because they got married. They changed their names. So he starts off as William Petty. He becomes the Marquis of Lansdowne. That's his first title. And then he becomes the Earl of Shelburne. So when you're dealing with writing about the British, you got to realize that they're shapeshifters. Right? The name changes. The person is the same person. The 3 names principle. So anyway, there's this famous carriage ride with Shelburne. I think we should call him Shelburne. This was the leading thinker of British imperialism at the time of the American Revolution. And his basic idea is, don't try to defeat the Americans with military means. Use intellectual subversion. Sell them on free trade and free markets, and you can destroy them within 10 to 20 years and get them back. So that's what he pushes. The ideas of Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations are simply the subversion of the French system, which we're going to get to, and the American system as it was starting off in the early United States. Right? Sell them on free trade. So he's the one who tells Adam Smith what to do. Now, how about this, boy? I came across this picture late at night, and I got scared. Boy, oh boy, that's Adam Smith. Whoa! And when you see the entire picture, it's generally a good idea to go to Wikipedia, because the pictures they have are in the public domain, right? You got to watch out. So this is a picture from the public domain. He's largely under Venetian influence. So here's Adam Smith, and he's the great theoretician of free trade, right? That everybody should follow their own relative advantage, right? If you can make potato chips, go ahead and make them. Somebody else will make computer chips, and then you'll be trading. Except that when the chips are down, making the computer chips is going to be militarily important, and the potato chips are not. In other words, the problem with this is what happens when there's a war, right? You can't rely on other powers. You have to have what we call a full set economy. You have got to have the productive process of your time pretty much covered. If you want to be independent, you've got to go from the raw materials to all kinds of products, electronics, but also aerospace and indeed military. There's no way around it. And if you don't have that, you're not independent. As a matter of fact, if you don't have that, you may be on your way to being ethnographic material for some sociologists to study. And we don't want to do that, do we? You don't want to become ethnographic material. The Reagan administration had a cult of Adam Smith. If you ever see these pictures of Edwin Meese, and he still has it. Edwin Meese, when he came out to announce that there was Oliver North and Iran-Contra, that day he was wearing his Adam Smith tie. And the picture of Adam Smith was somewhat more flattering than this one, but nevertheless that's who it was. Now, Malthus. This is Parson Malthus. And he is, in some ways, the plague of our existence today, because the left liberal mushheads, whether they know it or not, are Malthusian. A lot of people know the word Malthusian from reading Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, where the women have to carry these Malthusian belts with contraceptives in them. The basic idea is that overpopulation is your main problem. And here again, you can find an article on the internet. It's a plagiarism from a Venetian original. This is the amazing thing about the British, is their great intellectual, philosophic, economic poobahs are generally plagiarists from Venetian originals. The Venetians are the ones who developed these ideas. And we're talking Venetians in the worst, last, rotten, decadent, pre-collapse phase, right? The Venetians are going to be gone by 1799. This is one of the good things Napoleon did, right? Napoleon put an end to the Venetian Republic. There are kooks today who talk about refounding it, right? Crazy people in Venice, right? They're having referenda and petitions and all this. It's crazy. The source of Malthus is Jamaria Ortes, O-R-T-E-S. This is a guy to watch. He's a defrocked monk. He's an abbé, and an abbé is like, you get a religious title, but you don't have to do anything about it. He, writing in towards the end of his life, writes a book on demography, and he suggests that there is a carrying capacity of the world. And if you have any contact with the crazy Malthusians, green fanatics, environmentalist crackpots of our time, they're going to tell you, oh, there's a carrying capacity for Earth, and you dare not exceed it. Well, of course, any intelligent person would say, doesn't that depend on the technology? In other words, there are various kinds of technology that could radically increase that, right? I think when I was at the World Food Conference in Rome in 1974, the Soviet delegate came in and usefully said, with the technology of 1974, you could easily have 35 billion people on this planet, and it's more now. What was Jamaria Ortez's upper limit? 3.5 billion. That's it. So he's been proved wrong, hasn't he? I think we've more than doubled what he was talking about. So there he is, Jamaria Ortes, and you find him in Against Oligarchy. So Malthus is a faker. Now here's his idea. The first one is what everybody knows, right? That the food supply increases arithmetically. It goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's the food supply. But the population increases geometrically. 2, 4, 8, 16, doubles, whatever it is. In human experience, it turns out to be the opposite. It's the opposite. That the food supply increases geometrically and the population not so fast because of various countervailing things, right? People, in particular in the modern world, more education, more expensive to have children, many, many different reasons. The population growth eventually slows. The people who talked about a population bomb, some of them are in the Obama administration today, right? John Holdren, I think, is still there as the science advisor. The Paul Ehrlich, of the population bomb theory, what's the problem with that, right? That was 40 years ago. There is no population bomb. The world has a demographic crisis which is the opposite of what they say. You go to Japan. What's their problem? Not enough births, population getting older. Go to Europe, Germany, even Southern Europe, places where you wouldn't think so, right? Italy, man, things are getting bad. Fertility way down, population getting older. Russia, population actually falling until quite recently for many reasons. So if you go to the advanced countries, you'll see that there's a demographic crisis. In the United States, if it were not for immigration, one of the reasons we have to thank our lucky stars that people are willing to come here is that otherwise the U.S. would be in a falling population situation, right? These, what can we say, vindictive white Protestant reactionaries have not been prolific enough to keep themselves going on the world stage. But here's the thing that I would like to point out about Malthus. Malthus, as an economist, as separate from a demographer, he represents the established church, the Anglican Church of England. And of course, the head of that is the Queen. So his line is, the church with a capacious maw is best. And the maw is your mouth. A big mouth. Why? To eat things, to swallow things. What he's arguing is, he's saying, hey, capitalists, you are threatened by deflation. You are threatened by overproduction. If there's too much overproduction, then you're going to have crashes, right? Your system is going to crash down. So what you need to do is to have a church with a huge mouth. You need to maintain a class of parasites, clergy of the established state church. And they'll make sure that there's never a crisis of overproduction because they're just sitting there. They don't produce anything, but they'll buy it. They'll eat it. They'll consume it. So you can avoid these crises. So the Archbishop of Canterbury, the Archbishop of York, if you know the novels of Anthony Trollope, Barchester Towers, if anybody's ever heard of that these days, Malthus is a theoretician of the danger of overproduction and then the need to artificially dispose of the surplus. Right? There's a surplus of production. We've got to get rid of it somehow. Now, Keynes says, pretty much openly, that he is based on Malthus. Keynes says, if you have a crisis, you have unemployed people, you can hire them to dig a ditch and fill it in. You can build things that are absolutely useless. You can have a mine, you can hide pieces of gold in the mine, fill it up with dirt, and have the unemployed come and dig it out to get the gold. It's the same idea. How do you get rid of the surplus, right? How do you dispose of a surplus of production? So between Keynes and Malthus, it's the same idea. We, of course, would say the surplus has got to be realized, which in this case means put to work usefully. If you have a surplus of production, suppose you have empty factories and unemployed people, you can put those together and produce for need. You can produce infrastructure. You can produce housing. You can produce all the necessities of life. But this is a radically different point of view. At our founding conference, we had at least one person who came forward and said the best economics would be a combination of Marx and Malthus. Marx and Keynes. Marx and Keynes. No, please not. Certainly not with Keynes, and we'll get to Marx here in just a minute. Is everybody clear on this? Malthus and Keynes? Keynes basically says it. Okay. So for Ortes, here's the reference. Jean-Marie Ortes, the decadent Venetian kook who originated the myth of carrying capacity, June 1994. Tarpley.net. It's a component of the great coming against oligarchy once the Ford Foundation wakes up to the need for this. This was the time of the Rio conference, right? The United Nations conferences, Stockholm on environment, Rome on food, 1974. These have been the great turning points of this whole Malthusian debate. Now, concerning the U.S. ideology, we have pragmatism. And again, the point of going through this is I'm warning you These people are in your head. Unless you take positive measures to get them out, your thinking will be vitiated by this stuff because the culture we live in is so saturated with empiricism, right? Thanks for the information. Or in this case, will it work? Will it work? So William James of the bloody Harvard boutique, I think it's up until about 1904, 1905. This is pragmatism. And pragmatism means that the question of truth is irrelevant. Just doesn't matter. The only question with the doctrine is, will it work? What does that mean? Will it work? If I tell you that, I am the sun god, and you believe it, and you contribute money to me, then it's worked. It doesn't matter if I'm really the sun god or not, but you've given me the money, so it worked. And that's what he writes about. He says the question of truth has to be replaced by a question of cash value. The cash value of an idea in the marketplace of ideas. Right? This is really vulgar. And interestingly enough, we have to remember not every pragmatist is a fascist, but every fascist is a pragmatist. Because when you look at figures like Hitler and Mussolini, they make up crazy, crazy myths. And there's even, it's somewhat in dispute, right? There's a book by a guy called Rauschning where he says he talked to Hitler, and Hitler says to him, I realize there is no such thing as race, but I need the concept of race to beat down the liberal democratic institutions and seize power. So the idea is what Hitler was thinking, according to Rauschning, is it doesn't matter whether there is race or not, as long as I can use the concept to seize power and build a mass movement. Will it work? That's all it means. Will it work? So it means that you can use a myth. A myth is as good as scientific truth for somebody like this, right? If you can use a myth to take power, go for it. And this is not just theory. Benito Mussolini, the first fascist to seize state power in October 1922, says, the Duce, he says, he learned from William James, an action should be judged by its result rather than by its doctrinary basis or basis in doctrine. What he means by that is it doesn't matter whether it's true. It doesn't matter whether it's fantastic. Will the suckers believe it? His colleague, the colleague of William James at Harvard, George Santayana, says that William James, has this tendency to disintegrate the idea of truth and to recommend belief without reason, and in some of his writings, to encourage superstition. Superstition, myth. In other words, if I can convince you that God is angry at you and the only way to placate God is to vote Republican, well, does it work? If it works, according to this, it's fine.
Isn't the William James from the varieties of religious experience?
That's it. That's what Santayana.
And
that's
the first book. If you do a comparative religion degree, they make you read. That's the
right
foundation.
And the question of, is it true? Are there, is there a proof? No. It's just, do people believe it? Right? Can you use this? It's a matter of gate receipts, right? What's in the collection plate? If there's money in the collection plate, then your doctrine is true. Now, the other one, another plagiarizer, there are other books by Ortiz where he talks about the calculus of happiness, the calculus of virtue and vice. And sure enough, that part also is plagiarized, in this case by Jeremy Bentham. Bentham is an important guy. This is the so-called philosophic calculus, just straight out of Ortiz. The greatest good for the greatest number. He was the head of British intelligence. He essentially directed, in many ways, the rebellions in Latin America against Spain, because the British wanted to detach Latin America from British domination. So he's, in effect, the head of MI6. M or C or mother, whatever they call him. Jeremy Bentham. So he plagiarizes this stuff about the greatest good for the greatest number, and he also writes books like The Defense of Usury. You should be able to contract for as much as you want, right? You want to get a loan for 50 or 100% or 1,000% interest? That's your freedom. Big libertarian influence. And The Defense of Pederasty, which was considered fairly risque at the time. So he gets another seal of disapproval here from the against oligarchy. So behind the great Bentham, John Maria Ortiz. Now, you want to go visit Jeremy Bentham? He's still there. He didn't want to be buried. No Christian burial for him. He has been stuffed. He's at the University of London, which he founded. And according to many reports, they bring this out to preside over the meetings of the Board of Trustees. And I'm not kidding. There is also, in the case, there's his shrunken head, which I decided to spare you. I'm not going to show you, but if you want to look into it, go ahead. So the big question is this withered mummy of imperialism, is he still in your head? You've got to get him out. Now, more recently, this is a very powerful director. I think we mentioned him yesterday. Sir Karl Popper, who emigrated into Britain. They actually sent him to New Zealand during World War II. And the ones that the British sent to New Zealand were the ones that they wanted to preserve no matter what. In other words, London could be conquered and go down, but New Zealand was going to go on. This is more or less the official philosophy of the British establishment in at least parts of the 20th century. The main things about him: he hates Plato. He says Plato is a totalitarian. Plato does not want the open society. He wants to have dictatorship. His book is called The Open Society and Its Enemies, and it turns out that this character is the principal intellectual inspiration of George Soros. So much so that one of the main Soros foundations is called the Open Society Foundation. There you will find, I think, Morton Halperin of Pentagon Papers fame is still presiding there, directing all kinds of unsavory operations. Popper was the president of the Aristotelian Society, right? And as soon as you see Aristotle, grab a hold of your wallet. In 1947, Popper was a co-founder of this Mount Pelerin Society, and I want to stress them, right? You've heard of Bilderberg, Trilateral, Davos, right? Whatever that is. This one, in many ways, it's been one of the most influential. The Mount Pelerin Society in 1947 was to regroup reactionary economists, including the libertarian types, the monetarist types, the neoliberal. The foundation of neoliberalism essentially starts here, because it's after World War II. The New Deal has conquered the world. Dirigism, protectionism, mercantilism, conquered the world. So they say, we got to regroup. So let's get some money bags. Let's get some intelligence agencies. Otto von Habsburg, decadent European nobility, is there. William Buckley of the right-wing CIA, and so forth. And this is where Milton Friedman was launched, and the libertarians, von Hayek and von Mises. So you tell me whether libertarians are part of some kind of progressive movement in human society. I say no. Now, we also wanted to justify our psychological approach. The Austrian school was often known as the psychological school. They called themselves that. And this is this Ernst Mach that we mentioned, and this other character, Mengenham. We have to be mean to the Austrians, so please, I don't mean to offend our guests, because as far as I know, the Austrian school is not imposed in Austria, right?
Not too much.
Not too much.
Every party, but it's growing.
Okay, well, that's bad enough.
There is a group that wants to promote. It's called von Hayek Foundation.
Von Hayek Foundation. So this, first of all, this character Menger, this is one of the founders of the Austrian school. The problem for these people is the two successful schools in the world at this point are the American school and the German school. And they're the same, essentially. The American school of Hamilton and Henry Clay, which we'll get to, is represented by Friedrich List, German economist, or actually Austrian Empire, right? The guy who built all the railroads in Central Europe, right? You go to Czechoslovakia, Austria. Friedrich List built those railroads, and he's we'll talk about him. He's the inspiration of the customs union that allowed German unification. But Menger, and so the German, at about 1830 to 1840, the German school and the American school are the same, and this is an attack on both. And again, radical subjectivism. The interesting thing with economic schools is to figure out what is the theoretical standpoint. For example, with Keynes, it's easy. It's a central bank. A central banker. That's Keynes. That's what he's thinking. For us, it's a worldwide labor force and division of labor for production and for human progress. For the Austrian school, it's the individual speculator, the individual stock jobber or parasite going into the market, right? The Gordon Gekko. That's their standpoint. So the radical subjectivism with the standpoint being the individual speculative parasite. And what they come up with is called marginalism. And man, if you open economics textbooks, you wouldn't believe how much reference there is to marginal utility, marginal cost, marginal, because they say the truth of any system is revealed out at the edges of the system. So it's called the psychological school because of this marginalism. And they pose themselves questions like this. They don't pose the question, how can we rapidly develop the world economy and lift billions of people out of poverty? No. Why is the price of diamonds higher than the price of water? You need water, right? Diamonds won't help you if you don't have any water. And they'll say, well, we got to think about the psychology, the marginal utility. What's the marginal utility of water compared to the marginal utility of diamonds, and the scarcity and the status symbols? You get the idea. Or, another favorite, why are the wages of an air conditioning repairman more than a child care worker? Well, it's because you really want to get cool, right? You're hot and you got to get cool. And so it's all psychology. There's a professor at Princeton, my God, a guy called Malkiel, and his theoretical contribution was, if you're an individual speculator, it would be just as good to take a random walk down Wall Street. And you say, buy this, sell this, buy this, sell this, just random. That's as good as paying somebody to try to tell you what the stocks are going to do. So that's another problem. So again, when you listen to Ron Paul, Rand Paul, people like this, think about the methodological question of what's the standpoint? Are they reasoning from the needs of a society? If you ask Ron Paul or Rand Paul, is there a right to health care? Yeah, we say, yes, there's a right to health care. It's an essential human right. It's one of the economic Bill of Rights that Franklin D. Roosevelt proposed in January of 1944 in the State of the Union address. In other words, the reward of the American people for winning World War II was going to be to have economic rights. They're in the Cataclysm. If you ask Ron Paul, Rand Paul, they'll say, well, do you have the right? In other words, instead of going from the society as a whole, he'll say, do you have the right to expropriate somebody else's work? In other words, he brings it down to you and the doctor. See? So it's you and the doctor. It's not, what do we want to do for the whole society? It's, can you demand that the doctor treat you? And if you do and you can't pay, aren't you robbing the doctor? Get it? That's the methodological standpoint. So this is one of the things that's bad about this. And then Mach, very influential. I guess he's forgotten today if he's not even known in Austria. No reality outside subjectivity. It sounds a little bit like Bishop Berkeley. Phenomenalism, all I know are the phenomena. I can only see sensations. That's all there is that's real. So, and that's supposedly somebody who thinks he's a methodologist of science. Get the idea? We're interested in the big picture, right? What's the standard of living, right, worldwide? What's the demography? Is the population growing? Are they getting more prosperous? How about longevity? Are people living longer, right? Do they get more education? You see the idea. It's a whole different universe. And then, of course, we can't forget the Russian fascist Ayn Rand, Rand Paul. They deny it, but he was named after her. There's no doubt. There are movies about her. This is to take the most bestialized Nietzschean, the war of all against all. In other words, homo homini lupus. Man is a wolf to all other men. Right? That it's a struggle for existence. Social Darwinism. The devil take the poor, right? That the weak and the sick should be disposed of, right? So this is the inspiration for these people. And it was when you think about their emotional life, right? They say, John Galt. Who's John Galt? Crazy. And here she is. She was famous. She doesn't have it on here, but she had a pin that was a dollar sign. She worshipped the almighty dollar. This is what we're dealing with. This is sociopathic thought, if we want to call it thought. So, there we go. We've done Reisman and the Lonely Crowd. We've done the generations. We want to stress again the need for a method, right? Descartes, Discourse on Method. I was going to bring these, but they're too heavy. Not the Discourse on Method is relatively small. You need a method. But you say, well, I think like everybody else. I'm an empiricist and a pragmatist. No, you have a method. You are a philosopher, and you got to learn to break with that. There's another one, Sartre's Critique of Dialectical Reason is this huge book, and the part that's usually reprinted is The Search for a Method. A method. At least he realized that he needed a method. So we need a way of thinking that's not empiricism and pragmatism, and we have to seek the basis of philosophy in psychology. And the other purpose of this is to prepare you to be more effective by accessing creative powers that you may not be completely aware of. In other words, how do you make yourself a more powerful thinker? How do you think better, faster? How do you develop concepts? How can you assimilate large amounts of detail without staying up all night, right, and knocking yourself out? Let's go into it. Now, we have to have recourse to some of the Freudian terminology, right? This stuff was very popular in the 50s, especially. In the 1950s, there was a time when there was serious psychological inquiry. This has all been swept away by psychopharmaca. In other words, today, people have mental problems, drug them up, Ritalin, whatever it is, right? Some kind of tranquilizer, and so forth. So the ego, the id, right? The ego and the conscious mind, the id and the subconscious mind, or unconscious mind. This is the starting point. So the terminology comes partly from Freud, partly from some others. But let's start off. First of all, the ego. Well, this is what we mean when we say I. It is the conscious mind. So it's language, it's expressions that are precise. You can use the ego to evaluate, to check things, to choose, to prioritize, to direct, right? When you say, what am I going to do today? I better do this, this, and this, right? That's hopefully largely located in your ego. We're interested in this inquiry in, first of all, making your ego stronger. This is vulgarized today in the form of self-esteem. Right? Self-esteem would be a synonym for ego strength. and it's important to do it, right? Or gaining in confidence. There are ads on television now that children, especially girls, need to have mentors so they can have more confidence in their scientific ability. It's valid. It's okay. And self-esteem is good. The problem is you've got to have some content, right? It takes some work. Part of it can be done from the outside. Part of it can be done through rewards and awards and things like this. But the main thing is that the ego has to be strong enough to bridle this other part of the mind, the id, the unconscious mind. In other words, if the id says, now it's time to eat 6,000 calorie dinner, that's the id, the ego has to say, not this time. How about some watercress? How about some cucumbers? Right? And so on through all the things, right? Sex, money, food. Now it's time to gamble the house on a stock tip. The ego says, not so fast. Right? You get the idea. So, the ego has to be strong enough to impose a kind of quality control on the other parts of the mind, including, we'll get to the superego in just a second. So anyway, ego strength is a desirable quality, but not to be foolhardy or arrogant or think I'm infallible, or what you hear in Hollywood, right? That Ram Dass told me that I'm God, you're not God. Don't go down that road. Now the id it's been around for a long time, and Socrates knew it, right? In the, I think this is the Apology, let's see. Socrates, and this is Plato writing it, in all of us, even in good men, there is a lawless, wild beast nature which peers out in sleep, in dreams. So interestingly, there's really nothing in Freud that's not here already, right? The analysis of dreams and the notion of the id, the unconscious mind, the lawless, unconscious, wild beast nature which is kept suppressed in the daytime and which peers out in dreams and sleep. So this is now the world of compulsions and neuroses, and key among them, the Oedipus complex. In other words, the hatred of the father, the hatred of authority. And we're going to see this in Rousseau. I think we're going to get to this a little bit later today. Now let's just look for the Hollywood version of the id. Remember the famous movie Forbidden Planet? Leslie Nielsen got his career going with this. Walter Pidgeon was in it. And it goes like this. The spaceship goes to a planet where an eccentric scientist has been living alone, cut off from the rest of the universe. And Leslie Nielsen is the commander of the spaceship, and he's got some helpers with him. And what he finds there is Dr. Möbius, I guess it is, Walter Pidgeon, and his daughter, who's been kept secluded, right? Hasn't seen men other than her father. So what happens is the scientist's daughter falls in love with Leslie Nielsen, and the mad scientist sees this, and what he wants to do is to prevent the daughter from being taken away. He wants to keep the daughter with him. The problem is that they're living on a planet which had been inhabited by an advanced civilization, the Krell. And the Krell had developed, in their tremendous advancement, a completely robotized production system, keeps itself going, self-repair. But their final achievement had been to develop a way to transform your thought directly into physical processes. In other words, you could think something and it would actually appear as a material reality. And it turns out that this wonderful advanced civilization was destroyed the first night that this system was in force, because the monsters from the id, the beast-like nature that Plato writes about, came out and everybody killed everybody else. In other words, everybody had homicidal fantasies from the id about everybody else, and they killed each other. And that was the end of them. Never seen the movie? Monsters from the id. Okay.
Shakespeare's The Tempest.
And here's what happens. It turns out that this system is still there. And as Dr. Möbius, the mad scientist, realizes that these space guys are going to take his daughter away, he starts having homicidal dreams. And what happens with the homicidal dreams, I don't know if you can see it here, but here's a monster, which is energy produced by this system. In other words, it's the homicidal dream of the mad scientist that's coming to attack the spaceship and kill all these people. Nobody's ever seen this. Huh? So this is a monster from the id, and they have this, normally impenetrable barrier here, and they've got various guns and so forth. Like here's a space gun, a laser gun, disintegrator gun. But this thing is impervious because it's being created by the whole energy of the planet. And Möbius is across town sleeping, but he's having these homicidal dreams. How do I get rid of the spacemen? Monsters from the id. Why don't you see it sometime? Questions about this?
Clark said it's from Shakespeare's The Tempest.
It's Shakespeare's The Tempest, and Caliban, the monster.
Yes, I guess so. Right, but this is more than Caliban, right? You can see. Do you get the idea that there's this? It's sort of like a cat or something like this. Okay, now in addition to ego, id, there's also superego, the sense of duty, the sense of responsibility, the sense of restraint, right? These ideas that have been implanted in us by our parents and by our upbringing. In some ways, it's the gyroscope. Remember the gyroscope we talked about yesterday? So the superego says, you are not here for instinctual gratification. You got to sublimate those energies. You've got to redirect them according to the dictates of duty, responsibility, and self-restraint. And there is necessity, right? There are things you must do. You've got to obey the moral law. You've got to obey the moral code. The problem with this is, as long as the superego is a foreign body, you have this tension that you want to do something, and the superego tells you no, and you grudgingly go along with it. And this is not enough for our purposes, right? This will not get us to optimum mental functioning. The challenge we have to face is to educate the mind to the point where you want what is necessary. You desire to do what has to be done. You don't have to force yourself to do it. You want to do it. It becomes second nature. You don't want to be always grudgingly accepting the call of duty. You want to merge the sense of duty with what you want, with what you desire. Okay? So this is the problem with the superego. The Kantian, the old cliche, the Kantian mentality is the guy says, oh, I hate to do this, but I've got to do it. Oh, God, I'll grit my teeth and do it, right? This is no way to win, the struggle that we're in. You got to want to do it. Now, the ego, the id, the superego. The conscious mind, the ego, the unconscious mind, the id, the superego, the sense of duty, and the internal gyroscope. Is that the whole story? No. There's something more, and we have, somebody we'll talk about now, the psychoanalyst Kubi says, wait a minute, there's something else which is actually mentioned in Freud, but Kubi says we're going to make this into a big deal. In Freud, it's not a big deal. Make it a big deal. So there's the preconscious, the thing that was left out. And what his argument is, the preconscious is the seat of creativity. So if you've never been taught about the preconscious or something like it, in other words, the same thing under some other name, you have been denied an awareness of the most important part of your mind. And you've been denied an awareness of what makes you authentically human. What separates you from everything else in the universe is that you have creativity. It's also, in many ways, the seat of free will. And the thesis is that the contents of the functioning of the preconscious can be made conscious up to a point. Up to a point. And that one of the ways the preconscious is developed is that as you go along learning things, when you start off, whether it's ice skating or, a new discipline, if you have to study mathematics and so forth, at the beginning you have to do it step by step, and it's hard, but eventually you can do it faster because it becomes second nature. That second nature is, if you will, something that we can identify with the preconscious. Now, here's our guy. Let's go with him first. Lawrence S. Kuby, you see the dates, right? The first 3/4 of the 20th century. He was a psychoanalyst in New York. And this was before psychology was replaced by psychopharmaca, right? This was when there was a vogue, really, of Freud and things like this in those years of the 50s into the early 60s. And now it's just been replaced by psychopharmaca. So there was a lively interest in this stuff. And he, I think, was one of the leading ones. And his argument with Freud was this. Psychoanalysis usually wants to make you functional, right? Get you back to work, right? That's it. But he says, isn't there something more? Don't we want to unleash the creativity which is latent and sometimes active in every human being? Everybody is potentially creative. Don't we want to focus on that? In other words, can't we go beyond just getting you back so you can function and go to work and have a family and live a life? There's another dimension. So in that sense, he's closer to that Renaissance ideal of humanity, right? Or the ideal of German classicism, of Schiller and people like this. His work is controversial, as we'll say in a minute, but let's look at it. Here's a summary of what we've done so far. You have the conscious mind, the ego. Here we have thoughts and perceptions, right? Consciously, we're aware. Now, under the water, in other words, partially conscious, and you can make it more conscious, never maybe completely. You have, according to this, memories, stored knowledge, and creativity. Creativity has been left out here. Then you have the unconscious mind, and here you have all the monsters from the id. You have fears, violent motives, immoral urges, selfish needs, irrational wishes, unacceptable sexual desires, right? Incest, big part of this. Shameful experiences, right? Some of those memories when you remember something and it makes you wince, right? Oh, did I really do that? Yeah. But this is not yet Kuby, right? With Kuby we can go further. Here. This is pre-Kuby now. Again, the conscious is out here in the sunlight, and it's the tip of the iceberg. The preconscious is really the superego. That's my argument. But there's also the ego, and down here, the id, which is generally unconscious, although it can be made conscious. Now, I have to warn you again, this is controversial. Gore Vidal, of what I would call the left faction of the intelligence community, was a big opponent of Kuby, right? Gore Vidal, famous guy. He's against Kuby, and they fought over the case of Tennessee Williams, the playwright. Tennessee Williams wanted to get himself psychoanalyzed, so he went to Kuby and said, help me. So this scurrilous novelist, Gore Vidal, comes back on this later in life, and what did you do to Tennessee Williams? So Kuby, essentially his advice to Williams seems to have been, we don't know, it's covered by patient and doctor, confidentiality. Kuby said to him, look, you ought to stop writing for a while, but above all, stop being so promiscuous. And apparently Gore Vidal was about to go on a trip to Europe with Tennessee Williams, so he felt that he was losing out on something that he wanted. So in 1985, right about, 30 years after this, Gore Vidal writes a really nasty attack. I draw the readers, he's reviewing a book on on Tennessee Williams. He says, there was this guy, Kubi, and he appears in this book, October Blood. Oh my God. This came yesterday. As soon as I discovered this, I hadn't gone back to Kubi for quite a few years. Here's October Blood by Francine Duplessis Gray, a Russian emigre. And this apparently has a slander of Kubi under a different guy, Sanford Kubi. Anyway, Gore Vidal's critique is, Kubi was a slick bit of goods on the make among the rich, the famous, and the gullible. So Gore Vidal gets on Mike Wallace, CBS News. Tennessee Williams had problems of analysis with Kubi, who not long after took down his shingle and retired from shrinkage, meaning he abandoned his career as a psychoanalyst. Now, it's not true. Kubi came here to Maryland, enlightened and humane, and he began to practice at the Enoch Pratt Hospital near Baltimore. So what I'm doing here is I'm warning you that this is controversial, and Gore Vidal, of course, remember, he's somebody who hates Alexander Hamilton and the American system. He's a founder of a great fan of Aaron Burr. So, what's Kubi's approach? We find it here. This is the book I'd recommend. It's 75 or 100 pages, Neurotic Distortions of the Creative Process. Now, that's not really a good one. Let's use this one. Here's the idea. This is, if you will, a cross-section of your mind. I have to say in advance, I have used this personally for 40 years. I find this helpful. I have found it helpful. So, conscious, preconscious, unconscious. And the idea with this stuff is, imagine this is like a sausage, and you're going to cut it like that. Right? So if you do it here, it's going to be mostly conscious. In other words, when you cut the sausage and you open it up, you're going to see the conscious mind, but a little bit of preconscious and some unconscious. So this is your conscious purposes, right? Logical, chronological, communication, language, thoughts, purposes, experience. If you do it over here, you take a cross-section there, well, wow, you're going to have a huge unconscious, some preconscious, and a little bit of conscious. Okay, and if you take it down, probably the optimum is around there. In other words, you want to maximize the interplay of the conscious and the preconscious and reduce the unconscious as much as you can. So what you're aiming at is a productive alliance between your conscious purpose, right? I want to help humanity and save the world, but I'm going to need creativity to do that. I'm going to have to come up with an invention. Another one is to say, I want to solve the problem of poverty in the third world, and I can come up with a new energy system, right? Fusion power. That's going to take the preconscious. And you get the idea, right? Here we have fantasies, metaphorical condensation. The metaphorical condensation is a huge part of it. Again, that's when you're confronted with a huge array of facts, and you can summarize them, subsume them, synthesize a gestalt. Artistic creativity also plays a big role. Now, he has another one. These are both from Kubi. This is perhaps even clearer. Conscious, preconscious, unconscious. So here's the area, if you cut it along here, the area of symbolic precision, reality checking, and communication. Then if we move a little bit over here, imaginative creativity, creativity in the normal. Eventually we get creativity in the neurotic as the unconscious takes over, and over here, creativity in the insane. Because when the unconscious becomes completely dominant, as we see here, you're no longer in the world of reality. The mental processes are anchored in reality through the conscious, right? The conscious is hopefully aware of what is real. The other anchoring is in unreality. The unconscious is relentlessly devoted to being against reality, to denying reality, and to living in some past world. The contents of the unconscious, as Freud has pointed out, these are largely the traumas of childhood that have not been, in other words, traumas that were so overwhelming that the mind of the child could not cope and therefore repressed them. They are no longer accessible to being remembered. They are protected by powerful reaction formations. The preconscious, for some, is a black box. In other words, you can direct it, you can prod it, you can promote it, but you can't control it in the same way that you control the conscious mind. And I would agree that that's the case. So this is a book for all seasons. This is something that I urge you to take through life and compare it to what you find. And this may be, for many people here, the first time that you've ever been confronted with the fact that there is this creative faculty which deserves a name and it deserves a special status. It's so important that I got to talk to you about it some more. I regard this as one of the most important features of this entire course. Because if you can learn this, the sky's the limit. And I hope genius will come out of this in the form of you. This is within your grasp, right? You're here. It's a very self-selected sample of people that are here. But if you're here, you have an access to this. Now, what I have found, I have to talk about myself now, because there's no other way. The preconscious, in my experience, is closely related to the superego. In the sense of what responsibility are you willing to take? Right? Some people would say, well, to provide for my family, to do a good job at work. Okay, those are good things. Those are absolutely good things. But what I'm concerned about now is the breadth of the responsibility that you're willing to take. In other words, if you feel that those 50,000 people who die every day because of the world economic system under the International Monetary Fund and the central banks, if you feel some personal responsibility for those 50,000 people who die miserable deaths every day, I say that's the path to creativity. In other words, if you're willing to take responsibility for it, and if you're willing to assume, right, to face the need to do something about it, that makes you a more powerful thinker. Just right there. Just do that. If you have a narrow, selfish attitude towards life, my experience, observation is this will cripple your mentation. Mentation, that's a nice word from Kubi. Mental activity, right? Thinking. Your thinking power, your creative power for discovery and for new ideas will be crippled if you have a narrow, selfish attitude. In other words, one thing is, I got to do something about the 50,000 people who die every day for no reason. Because this cripples the world economy, right? Those people represent value. They could be a plus for everybody else in the world. I mean, it's humanitarian and moral at the same time. But if you say, well, I got to find out how to make a killing in the stock market today, for me, number one, then you have crippled your mentation, okay? Altruism is good. In other words, to have this as a private virtue, right? I want to help you give $1 to the poor guy in the street, right? Make a contribution to a charity. That's good, but it's still narrow. What it is the fate of humanity is there, and you've got to take some responsibility. And that is the most powerful aid that I know of to the formation of concepts. You want to develop your concept-forming ability to subsume those masses of detail. This is the way. Now, Socrates had an inner voice, the so-called demon. A demon is a bad word. Don't think of it as a demon. It's not bad. Socrates does say The favor of the gods has given me a marvelous gift which has never left me since my childhood. It is a voice which, when it makes itself heard, deters me from what I am about to do and never urges me on. Now I say this is a version of the preconscious. It tells you, don't do that. That's a terrible mistake. That's also a good function. In other words, when sometimes the preconscious can express itself as fear. In other words, wait a minute, you're about to do something crazy. Don't do it, says the preconscious, or allied with the superego, right? So Socrates has some idea of this. How about this one? Virgil's Aeneid. We have Nisus and Euryalus. They're two Trojans, and they say, look, we've been put here on guard duty, but we're getting bored. Let's go and attack the Latin camp. Right? This is the struggle in central Italy about who's going to found Rome. So Nisus, here it is in Latin, Nisus says, Euryalus, do the gods instill this passion in our minds, or does each person interpret his own fierce desire as the voice of a god? In other words, do the gods give us these ideas, or does each man, each soldier, make his own desire into a god? I suggest the preconscious. In other words, the preconscious is often an intuition to attack. This is the business that I've been in for a long time, right? But when you're trying to have an anti-establishment movement, you necessarily have light forces. We are light forces. If you are light forces, you cannot get bogged down in a siege. You cannot let yourself be besieged. You've got to keep moving and keep attacking. In other words, attacking means intellectually, right? You've got to constantly be coming up with new initiatives, tactical and strategic. Let's attack John Allen. Let's attack the ISIS Tsar. Let's attack McCain, right? Depending on what they're doing. You've got to come up with new ways to express this fundamental goal. So I recommend even Virgil. This is not the great work that many think, but still tells us things. What has occurred to me at various times is that with the preconscious, you get ideas, and the feeling is you're not thinking it is thinking you. In other words, you've got to do something. Right? But remember, this is the big thing. All intuitions have got to be carefully checked, evaluated, and screened by the conscious ego. In other words, here in late imperialism, there's a big cult of intuition, right? They say, and this I have to separate myself from this. They say, you don't have to know anything. Just go with your gut. No, not with your gut. In other words, you've got to do preparation. You've got to focus. There's got to be a cultivation of reason, right? It's got to be checked, evaluated, and screened by the ego. And you can compare all this to the Holy Spirit in Christianity, right? The Holy Spirit moved me, so I did it. That's fine, but the conscious ego has still got to screen it, because otherwise, you get somebody like Warren Jeffs. Like, why did you marry that 12-year-old girl? Well, the Holy Spirit told me to do it. No, that was not the Holy Spirit. And this is the problem. When you get these impulses, especially in religion, the Holy Spirit told me to do it. Is it from here or from here? You've got to learn to distinguish between the voices. There's the voice of the id. Don't go down that road. And then there's the preconscious, and that could be an earth-shaking discovery of tremendous utility to humanity. And remember that discoveries and inventions generally start from an individual. Now, not an individual living like Robinson Crusoe alone on a desert island. In conjunction with others, there is an interplay, but the steps forward actually come from the preconscious minds of individuals. And in terms of a motor for the world economy, this is it. Invention. Without scientific invention, realize this technology, and as production, our species is doomed. So we've got to learn to promote this, right? We need to get more and more of this and put it at the center of education. Now let's see here. So remember, the subconscious is controlled by traumas that have been received from others. Your mother, your parents, right? The coach, God knows, right? Who knows what traumas you've gone through, right? The priest, it happens. So the subconscious is what we call heteronomic. It's not the real you. It's controlled by others. In other words, it's like having bruises. You can't say, I am this bruise. If you have bruises on your soul that you got from people along the way, that's not you. Nevertheless, many people will say, my sense of self is in my id. What I want. Right? My desires. I need this. I want that. In my opinion. Opinion. Opinion is the form of thinking that comes from the id. This is my opinion. Turn on talk radio, turn on Limbaugh, Hannity, O'Reilly, the rest of them. That's the id. One in particular, Mark Levin. Mark Levin has always struck me. That's the enraged id. The enraged petty bourgeois id is Mark Levin. So I urge you, don't think that the residues of traumas that have been inflicted on you by other people in the course of your life, don't think that's the real you. So the ego and the preconscious, the ego and the preconscious superego, they are capable of freedom. That's where you can actually make a conscious decision based on cultivated reason and then act on that. And of course, the problem of all of this is insanity necessary for genius? Is neurosis, psychosis, are these essential for genius status? And our answer is no. This is a very widespread thing. I showed you yesterday those three, right? Hawking, he's okay, I guess, misguided. But in particular, Nash, right? Nash of game theory. The idea that this guy who had been, again, New Jersey, of all places, said that he was a paranoid schizophrenic. And he's held up as a model of a beautiful mind. And his thing is game theory, which is, what speculators engage in. That's not genius, right? It's not genius. But they put up this guy Nash to try to convince you, oh, you want to be a genius? Got to be a paranoid schizophrenic. It's not true. And that's a counterinsurgency dogma. In other words, if we had a society of geniuses, we wouldn't have bankers or those politicians or that ruling class that I showed you yesterday, right? We'd sweep them aside in the twinkling of an eye. So when they tell you, essentially, if you want to be a genius, you have to be crazy. A lot of people say, well, in that case, I'd rather not, right? So this is misguided. Now, this is again, I can't stress enough. It's not about information. It's about the concept. It's about begriff, the rapid assimilation of vast amounts of detail. Kubi worked with hypnosis to try to clarify some of these things. He said, I'll put you in a room with objects, and I'll ask you then, I'll take you out of the room, and what did you see in the room? So the conscious mind can remember 20 objects, 20 elements of an experience. Then he says, in his experience, in his clinical practice, he would do hypnosis. The preconscious mind can automatically assimilate 200 elements. See? Consciously 20, preconscious 200. Why don't we have the ability to remember more of this? I've been told that when people are given these truth drugs, right, which you don't want to do because it's dangerous, you can remember every telephone pole of your trip here, right? You can remember it. at one level, but your conscious mind doesn't access it. Perhaps it's just as well. So Kubi says the preconscious represents the 7 league boots of the mind, right? The 7 league boots, so you can go, 10 miles with one step. You don't have to be pedestrian and, go on foot. You can really make tremendous progress. So the preconscious, once again, can assume vast quantities of information into the Holy Grail, the concept. So think about concepts. And another way to say this is to synthesize a gestalt, right? Carl Gustav Jung. This is another guy who's not good. I actually call him Carl Gustav Junk, which is the proper German pronunciation. He's Carl Gustav Junk. Junk. You can synthesize it. And the only reason I'm putting this up here is that he popularized the term Gestalt psychology. So it's not fact by fact, but all at once. However, the trick is that will happen to you all at once after several years of work. In other words, you're not going to be able to do that right away. When you train your mind, think about these things, and try to act against the impulses of the id, try to focus on your preconscious. After several years of that, that's when this will begin to happen. So, if you want a multi-decade attention span, no more instant messaging. Now we have some other notes from Kubi. Kubi has some etymologies here in Latin. I don't know. Cogito, right? Cognition, thinking, cognitive. He says that is to shake together. In other words, you take all the information and you put it in a pot and you shake it. And then intelligo is to choose what you want. My method, I don't have this. I have Latin, but not this. My method is topica ordo. Topica is on a piece of paper, you write the various things that will go into your article or your analysis, right? You probably put them in circles with arrows and things like that. Topics. What are the ideas? And then the ordo is the actual outline, in what order these will appear. So this is something like it. And remember, the way that you present the new concept, the way you write it up, is probably not the way you discovered it. Because it comes all at once, right? The lightning flash, right? The light goes on, and you've got the new concept. This is not the way you're going to present it in your article. You don't say, I was, driving down here and pow, I got this idea. No, you've got to do it. You've got to say, okay, because of the situation 1, 2, 3. In other words, you have to lay it out in logical sort of outline form. You did not discover it by logic. Logic pertains to the ego. Reason seems to depend to a large degree on the preconscious. Now, the other point is fear. We talked about fear in a number of ways. One of the things that's going to block you on the road to reason and discovery is fear. Because this stuff is scary, right? Reason is subversive, especially in a society like this, which is so militantly against innovation or anything positive. New ideas are axiomatically a rebellion, right? A new idea is just about always going to challenge parental authority, academic authority, political authority, military authority. In other words, if you're a subordinate in the chain of command and you say we should do a flanking attack here, and the German says, no, we're going to do a frontal attack. Right? Think of a World War I movie, right? We're going to go straight over the top and everybody gets killed. No, don't do that. Go around the edge. No, right? New ideas are a rebellion. So when you get a new idea, you're going to feel fear. Because you're going to say, what if I'm wrong? What if they attack me? What if Professor so-and-so speaks against me? I can't do it. So you got to overcome the fear. It's also important to bear in mind, very influential book, Thomas Kuhn, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, 1962. This is the attempt to develop a typology to codify how scientific revolutions come about, say Copernican, what he calls the Copernican revolution. I think his history is weak. He doesn't understand the Venetians. He doesn't understand the politicization of science, how the Venetians and the British try to claim discoveries that they never had. And Copernicus is a dubious character, too, in my estimation. But this is an influential book. It's one of the most influential books of the 20th century. And when you're talking about thinking and discovery, you got to factor it in. So what his is when the new concept, he calls it the new paradigm. Essentially, it prevails when the supporters of the old theory either retire or die. So you see the idea is that the established, entrenched people, right, the people whose careers depend on the old system, are not going to be happy with the new system. The new system can be a great benefit for humanity, but they say, wait a minute, what about my career? I'm not going to give up my endowed chair. You get the idea. Now, example. Here's an example from my experience. Now, I have to ask for your indulgence, right? I'm not doing this to try to blow my own horn, but I can only give you examples that I know from the inside. In other words, things that I've done, okay? So please don't judge me too harshly. I want to tell you a story, what I think was a discovery by me that sort of illustrates this principle. It's not so long ago, 2007. You may remember the post-9/11 era was a field of battle swept by confused alarms where ignorant armies clashed by night. So we were always looking for the second 9/11, at least I was. The whole point of the 9/11 studies was, would there be a second one, and would that lead to some bigger war, maybe a world war? And the person that you had to watch was Cheney. So, what do? I read the Washington Post, watch some cable TV, try to keep up, right? Look on the internet, but judiciously, right? Don't go down the paranoid route, right? Don't fall for Ron Paul and the libertarians. But at a certain point, I became aware in 2007 that Bush and Cheney were going to be leaving office, at the end of 2008. And would they try to do a Parthian shot, a parting shot? In other words, at the end of their tenure, would they, they kept saying, we're not going to leave office until the Iran problem is solved. Well, what does that mean? Sounds like a world war. So, this is now the problem as I've understood it after 2011, 2012. Well, actually, I'll do it in the chronology. Here's a newspaper that used to exist here in Washington. It's unfortunately gone out of existence. It is the September 2007 issue of the Rock Creek Free Press of Matt and Elaine Sullivan, wonderful people, wonderful activists, Quakers, actually. This is the good wing of the Quakers. So this is an article that I wrote on July 21st, 2007, saying Cheney determined to strike in U.S. In other words, that he would pull some kind of quite possibly a false flag operation, or maybe not. And it might be a military false flag. It might be something like a Gulf of Tonkin event. Cheney determined to strike in U.S. Only impeachment or a general strike can stop him. So what I say is, watch out for Bush and Cheney. They're going to do something. Now, how did I know? Well, I read all the stuff, right? I'm Washington Post, cable news, internet, looking, trying to assimilate as much stuff. And having focused on this for a couple of years, eventually you develop an intuition, right? A sense, a feel. Got to be checked every time. But you begin to get some ideas. Now, that was July 21st. Now, in retrospect, it turns out that I was right. And nobody told me this. This is not some source who says, hey, here's a leak. Cheney is pushing for war. I didn't have that. I call it the absolute idea. This is an intuition of pure reason, if I may be so bold. So it turns out, in his biography, It's called, here we go. In his, this is another late night typo, but in his time, or in my time, in my time it's called. Anyway, it's Cheney's autobiography. There's only one. Cheney's autobiography. He's talking about June 2007, a couple of weeks before I wrote this. He says, we want to attack Syria, June 2007. Cheney writes in his autobiography, I again made the case for U.S. military action against the reactor. The reactor means they claimed that there was a nuclear reactor in Syria that was being built, like the Osirak in Iraq before. This was a reactor in Syria. So Cheney says, I made the case. He talks about a meeting in the White House in June 2007. I know absolutely nothing about any of this stuff. He says, I was a lone voice. After I finished, Bush asked, does anyone here agree with the vice president? Not a single hand went up around the room. In the event, the site was destroyed by 3 months later by Israeli warplanes. So here's what this is what Cheney is telling the London, or they're writing a review, the London Independent, August 26, 2011. So what I'm trying to get at with this is, if you try to develop an attention span and focus relentlessly on a topic and educate yourself and realize what the role of fear, because some of this stuff is scary, right? You're going to put that out. Oh, my God. This was sitting in the Washington subway. They had drop boxes for the Rock Creek Free Press. It was in all the stations of the Washington subway. So this was all over Washington, all through August. And it seems to have been on target. At least that's what Cheney tells us here. And again, this is not based on a source report, right? There are some people, they're perfectly good people. Seymour Hersh. He has sources, right? He's got 1 million sources in the Pentagon. I don't have that, but I say the absolute idea is stronger. Now, to embroider on this a little bit, to my benefit once again, at the end of August, a friend said, there's going to be a meeting of peace activists, top peace organization leaders at Kennebunkport. This is not Bush's estate in Kennebunkport, but this is the home of some peace activists. So he called me on the 24th of August, and he said, hey, I'm leaving for Kennebunkport here in a few minutes. Why don't you write a statement, and we'll try to get these peace leaders to sign it, right? Some kind of a warning based on this previous thing. So I said, fine, and I wrote this thing saying, it's likely that Cheney is going to try to start a war soon, right? Imminent, I think I said. I should put that up here too, but the slides are enough already. So the Kennebunkport warning was something that I wrote saying Cheney's about to unleash some kind of a nuclear false flag against, I thought, Iran in the Middle East. You'll see that it was Syria. Got that wrong. Wrong, right? It was Iran, but I don't know. Hard to tell. So the Kennebunkport warning was written, distributed, and published between the 24th and the 26th. And on Wednesday, October 29th, U.S. Air Force personnel loaded 6 cruise missiles on a B-52 in North Dakota, missiles with 5 to 150 kilotons of explosives. And on Thursday, August 30th, this rogue B-52 with the 6 missiles made a 3.5-hour flight to Barksdale, Louisiana, which is the jumping-off point for the Middle East. And there it was stopped. And this is the famous rogue B-52 of August, September. Now, many people here never heard of any of this, right? No? No? Oh, my God. Go to tarpley.net. It's all there, right, including the text of the Kennebunkport warning. This really happened. I mean, there is no doubt. You can check it with somebody like Wayne Madsen. Wayne Madsen has sources. He tells you, what they told him. Not too long after this, the Secretary of the Air Force was fired, the military commander of the Air Force was fired, and there was a day when the entire U.S. Air Force stood down, did not fly, one day. Never in post-World War II history had this happened, because they wanted to find out where all their nuclear weapons were. And my argument was that this was a rogue network in the military who were taking this plane with these missiles, and they were quite possibly going to use them in the Middle East, outside of the chain of command. They essentially privatized the B-52 with the 6 missiles, and they were going to use that for not something that even Bush had decided, but which they decided they wanted to do. And maybe that's hard. That's still hard for people to grasp, but they did it. Except that when it got to Louisiana, somebody said no, and then that went up the chain of command, and the answers were no, 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 no. But what I'm trying to point out is you can, if you, again, school yourself and develop this capability, you can get valid intuitions of this type. You can. Takes work, right? Takes a few years to get going, because you got to watch out fear, envy, all sorts of problems, right? It's like you're going across a minefield, and at different points these things explode, or jets, like right? Different people, fear gets squirted on you, or whatever it is. But it can be done. So I simply offer this, because the implicit question is, hey, you're talking about developing creative faculty. What do you know, right? Well, you're so smart, why ain't you rich? Well, this is my modest... Now, Kubi, not perfect. He's too focused on free association. He thinks that the ability to have free association is the key. Yes and no. In other words, that's a very important thing, but it's not the whole ballgame. He doesn't talk about necessity. In other words, what he really imagines is that creativity is artistic creativity, and again, that's somehow a matter of opinion. He doesn't really go in for scientific discovery as being the main one. I think he has an authority by the name of Ernst Kris, K-R-I-S, who writes about, at least he gets into scientific creativity, discovery. But he doesn't have necessity. And above, for humans, necessity is ananke, scarcity, penuria.
Can you explain that term, free association? I've heard it before, but...
Well, if I say...
Brainstorm?
If I say Sarah Palin, what do you think of?
Oh, okay.
Right? Or if I say...
Lipstick on a pig.
Joni Ernst, bread bags. But not so simple. In other words, an array of those, right? Free association. Then, there's like the Rorschach test where they show you a blot. What do you see there? Is that a butterfly or is it a vampire? Right? You get the idea, right? And that tells things about you. So I think he doesn't really tackle scientific discovery in the way that we would want to. When he talks, for example, about these financial geniuses, right? That somebody could watch a stock market and say what to buy, like he'd be taking in all this rapidly changing stuff, and then he'd say, here's what you got to do. So he sees it that way, like almost sometimes it's like an idiot savant, right? It's somebody who can come up with these answers so easily. But on the whole, Kubi, I would stress again, very good person to go with. Now, what we've come to now is some historical literary examples. Do we want to go on with this, or do we want to... Huh? Bathroom break? Okay. Because what we're going to do, let me just show you where we're going now, is with Plato and the gold, silver, and bronze, and Plato in the Republic, Book 7, the divided line. And this corresponds to the id, the ego, and the preconscious, the exercise of reason. So we're going to have Plato and Dante, and then we're finished with this part of the unit.